Well, barely a fortnight on from his appointment as Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf has fired his first broadside across the bows of the UK government. As we've been reporting, he's confirmed he plans to launch a legal challenge against the Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack's decision to deploy a Section 35 order. It would block Holyrood's gender reform bill. Well, Dr Philippa Whitford is the SNP spokesperson for Scotland at Westminster and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
We've spoken this morning to Lord Sumption, who says the Scottish Government's case is weak. Lord Hope has said previously that he thinks the Scottish Government's chances of winning are very low. Your own colleague Joanna Cherry has questioned the wisdom of taking legal action that she thinks is unlikely to succeed. This is all fairly pointless and a waste of money, isn't it?
Oh, I don't think it's pointless at all. I mean, obviously, both governments will have had their legal advice. Naturally, I haven't seen it. I'm not part of the Scottish Government, and obviously it's now up to the Court of Session to decide. But I think it is very important to actually bring the case. The deadline is next Monday, and after that there would be no option to defend the GRR bill, which was passed, remember, by 2/3 of MSPs. So if they're going to just abandon something like this that was worked on for 5 or 6 years of consultation and spent 9 months going through the Parliament and then passed with such a huge majority, then they would literally be just accepting that actually devolution is over and everything is just the decision of the Westminster Government.
Nobody's suggesting it's abandoned. What the suggestion here is that it's looked at again and to revisit this to make sure that it complies with equalities legislation across the UK.
Well, it doesn't clash with equalities legislation. People raise cases that relate to what the law is now. It's the Equalities Act in 2010 that said that if someone even proposed transitioning, they have the protection of the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, and that legislation in 2010 no longer required a person to be under medical supervision. So organisations, sports bodies, women's centres have all been acting along with the Equalities Act since 2010.
But this particular piece of legislation would mean different legal genders at different ages in different parts of the UK. And as we heard earlier from Lord Sumption, he believes that would be a problem for local authorities, for employers, when it comes to anti-discrimination laws, for instance, on equal pay, etc.
But the protection around equality for gender reassignment does not hang on whether you have a gender recognition certificate. As I said, from the moment you propose transitioning, you have that protection by your employer, by any public body.
But it's not about the certificate. It's about the different ages, for instance, and operating in different parts of the UK and that being challenged.
Gary. We've different ages of marriage. Scotland had different ages for centuries. They realigned in the 20th century, and just last month in England, they were changed again. So, are we saying that people who go on holiday from Scotland to England are suddenly unmarried?
It's not about going on holiday. It's not about going on holiday. It's about equal pay, for instance, which gives you have a legal right to that, for instance. That's nothing to do with different ages of marriage. But if there are different ages of gender, different ages of changing your gender, then that could leave employers, for instance, open to legal challenges, couldn't it?
No, because the Equalities Act gives you that protection whether you have a certificate or not. And that's what I'm saying. There's no mention in the Equalities Act of requiring a certificate. And it already says that a person does not require to be under medical supervision. The WHO no longer recognise the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is the entire basis of the 2004 Act. You don't need to have had surgery or be on drugs or do anything else. You need that diagnosis and you need to live in your required gender for 2 years. So you actually have to live in your required gender before you get a gender recognition certificate. So the certificate, we don't check certificates or do physical examinations of people when they are going into all women's spaces. And the bodies that came out supporting this bill, Rape Crisis Scotland, Engender, Scottish Women's Aid, they have all been managing, respecting trans people and protecting women since 2010. And frankly, if we were to just simply allow a bill that was worked on so long with no input, nothing raised by the UK government, either during the advanced stage of it or during its passage. Indeed, Theresa May was putting forward the same legislation in 2017. She had the same plan. That was only abandoned in September 2020.
Do you agree with Nicola Sturgeon's assessment just a couple of months ago that those who are critics of these reforms are cloaking their transphobia, misogyny and racism?
No, I don't. I think, unfortunately, the public discourse around it, particularly fueled by social media, has just become so aggressive. It's just not possible to have the debate. And I think there's been people on both sides of the argument that have raised that temperature. So women are concerned. They don't feel their concerns have been soothed. And trans people feel they're being turned into a political football.
Well, surely when it comes to soothing those concerns, the answer here is for Holyrood to look again at this legislation and try to find some middle ground rather than ploughing ahead with this legal action.
But it's how to find the middle ground. If you read the statement of reasons that was published, basically half of it was just, we can't have something different. Well, I'm sorry, that's the basis of devolution. And the other half...
Hamza Yousaf suggesting there is no middle ground either, that what has been passed here is correct and needs to be enacted.
The other half of reasons were about the Equalities Act. There was nothing in the statement of reasons that would allow you to modify the Act. And both Alistair Jack and Kemi Badenoch have refused to come to the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee in Holyrood to explain what are the changes that could be made that would allow the bill to pass. So what is the Scottish Parliament meant to just keep randomly passing bills with tweaks to them and hoping eventually one of them is accepted?
Isn't the reality here that this either way is not going to end well for Hamza Yousaf? We heard earlier from Maggie Chapman that in essence, had he not challenged this, the Greens would have walked away from the Butte House agreement. But we know that fewer than 1 in 5 Scots support a court challenge. We know that the country and your party is completely divided on the issues around this bill as well. There is no win here for Hamza Yousaf, is there?
Well, if you look at the original consultation, 60% of the public supported the principle of the bill.
But then the Isla Bryson case came along and people saw how it worked in reality.
Yeah, and I've already talked about how poisoned the public debate has become. But if the Scottish Government did not try to defend devolution, the first ignoring of a legislative consent motion was in 2012, but yet they have been left, right and centre in all the Brexit legislation.
But people have
seeing the Westminster Government legislating in devolved areas. We're already seeing them ignoring legislative consent motions. So when this was passed by 2/3 of MSPs after 9 months of process that the UK government didn't even respond to. Kemi Badenoch rocked up 3 days before the final vote.
Well, she had spoken to Shona Robertson beforehand. There had been exchange of letters, etc. But just on the principle,
Shona Robertson wrote in October and she answered a couple of months later.
Just very briefly, if you wouldn't mind, on why the public are divided on this. The Isla Bryson case came to the fore after this legislation was passed. Is someone in Isla Bryson's situation someone who should be eligible for a gender recognition certificate after self-identifying for 3 months?
The Isla Bryson case happened under the current legislation, not under the new legislation.
But under the new legislation, someone in Isla Bryson's position would be able to self-declare after 3 months. I'm asking you, in principle, do you agree with that?
Under the new legislation, the police are informed if someone is on the sex offenders register who applies for a certificate, and they can also block someone who is under investigation for a sexual offence. There's no such protection in the 2004 Act. The only person who can challenge a certificate is the Secretary of State. And how often is that going to happen? So actually, there are more protections regarding something like the Isla Bryson case now under the Scottish legislation than there is under the current legislation.
Philippa Whitford, MP, thank you very much for your time this morning. We had hoped to hear from both the UK Government and the Scottish Government on this morning's programme, but we were told no one was available for interview.